Excuse me, can I have your attention? We're going to take a seat for a moment here, or stand by a chair. We're about to begin. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kernan, Commander of the American Legion Post 143, Pembroke, Mass. It's my honor to welcome you here today in this event honoring Pembroke servicemen who have lost their lives on the war on terror. At this time, would everybody please rise for the posting of the colors?
Stand put. First Lieutenant Brian M. McPhillips, Honor Guard, prepare to post the colors. Present arms. The Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Order arms.
For those who have a chair, please be seated.
At ease.
Today we have many distinguished guests, including Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford. At this time, I would like to introduce Pembroke's representative to Congress, the Honorable William Keating. William Keating.
Thank you all for being here. General, Mrs. Dunford, thank you very much for your presence, and thank you for the extraordinary job that you're doing and you have been doing, but particularly in your new position. We're all very pleased to have you there. And to the McPhillips family, to the Bean family, thank you for your presence here. This is why we're here. And I know that in Pembroke, this is a very important day. And I know that what an extraordinary town this has been. The Pembroke Military Support Group, Julie Caruso, the work that all of you have done makes us proud to represent this community. And it's a pride that is overmatched in the people we're remembering here today. Brian McPhillips was a sad day in this community on April 4th, 2003, when the word came that he had lost his life. Protecting our country and making this community proud. And a community like this, that word spreads with extreme speed and extreme somberness. Brian is everything that epitomizes being an American, and this community deserves to be very proud to have him as someone that lived here. He's a person who worked here locally. And at BC High grad, and I'm saying this from a parent of a Zavarian high school. Not an easy thing to give credit to BC High and to Providence College, and I'm saying that as a BC graduate. So, what an extraordinary young man, and he achieved so much, and was a leader so fast. Really exemplary, one of only two in his platoon that received the Naval Awards for his training, Camp Lejeune. So. We're here because of an extraordinary commitment to country. And we're here also with someone that I was told was inspired by Brian's work. And that's Matthew Bean, who was here in the community, serving, inspired by Brian, inspired by his patriotism to his country. And another sad day hit this town on May 31st of 2007. When that word spread as well. We're here to make sure we have a permanent recognition of this. For a family, it's not a joyful day. No family wants to be in this position. But it's a day where you can't even describe the pride that must exist. It's a pride in people that stepped forward, that didn't have to, did it for their love of country, the love of the people they lived with. A person, in Brian's case, and also in Matthew's case, that received extraordinary recognition, receiving bronze medal for their work and their heroism. In Matthew's case, as well as Brian's, they saved lives. Matthew's circumstances, interesting enough, are much like my own family's, with my own uncle saving people's lives and being killed in that process. And it's a reverence for Mother that I can remember with my own grandmother, when she would just touch the belongings I never saw in my life. Just the tenderness and reverence for the things that were left at home, never to be used again or worn again, yet a person who is still with us in every respect. These two individuals, and I know that there are many people here who have sacrificed family members, and the family of Jesse Crudoff is here as well. People that understand what our country's about. And I hope as people come to the central part of our community here, and they view that plaque, they'll remember, they'll be inspired. But what I get a feeling of, and I hope we all get this feeling, is that we feel obligated. We all have an obligation in our life. And when we look at this plaque, I hope that's instilled in us and renewed in us once again. We have an obligation if the calling is to serve your country in the military. We have an obligation if your calling is to teach young people and bring their lives forward in this great country, or to be a nurse and bring people forward, or to be a good father or mother, a good brother or sister. Do what we can in our own lives to make sure that their extraordinary sacrifice is something that's a living legacy. That's what counts. That's what they would say. It's about those looking forward, those they served with, and the people yet born that will benefit because of what they did. So I'm very pleased and humbled to be here. And I'll take this every time I come into this meeting hall as a renewed obligation to do everything I can do, as I'm sure all of you will feel similarly. I want to thank the families again for their sacrifice. And I want to thank and have us all take a moment this morning to remember everyone that is still serving us all around the world or here at home, doing so much to make sure that this country continues to benefit from their extraordinary work and sacrifice. Thank you.
Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford.
Representative Mrs. Keating, Senator DiMasello, Administrative Thorne, and the selectmen, distinguished guests, and most of all, the McPhillips family. It's an honor to join you here this morning as we take time to recognize two sons of Pembroke in what Mr. McPhillips described as a family event. Two sons of Pembroke, Brian McPhillips and Matthew Bean. I also want to recognize two other special people before I begin. That's Mr. and Mrs. Crudup, also the proud parents of a soldier who served honorably. And I want you to know that he's in our thoughts and prayers today as well as the thousands of young men and women who are deployed around the world today. I know that you all will keep them in your hearts and in your thoughts and prayers as we conduct this ceremony. You know, this morning, for me, caps a week back home.
I've spent the week back in Marshfield with family. This event is actually the capstone of the week. We drive back to Washington, D.C. Later today. And I'm going back home re-energized from my duties in Washington, D.C. As a result, certainly, of seeing my family, but also as a result of spending time with you here today. I think as Representative Keating would tell you, it's easy to become jaded when you're in Washington, D.C. And if all that you thought about and all that you knew about our country was from the constant harping of the negative press that we have seen over the last couple of months, you could be pessimistic about the future. But I got to tell you, this morning, I'm actually optimistic about our future. Because as long as our nation actually is made up of towns like Pembroke, Massachusetts, and as long as we continue to produce families like the McPhillips family and the Bean family, and young men like Brian McPhillips and Matthew Bean, as long as that's the case, whatever challenges we face as a nation, we're gonna overcome those challenges. Of that, I'm absolutely confident. And so I go back to Washington with that. I know everybody here knows the story of Brian McPhillips. Brian graduated from Providence College. He went off to be assigned a 2nd Tank Battalion at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, after finishing the basic school in Quantico. And in late 2002, Brian's unit was assigned to my unit, which was the 5th Marines out of Camp Pendleton, California. And at that time, it was pretty clear that we were going to go to war in Iraq. And so Brian's unit, which was a tank unit, was sent to my unit, which was an infantry unit. And we all then deployed to Iraq. And we know the story that Brian's unit was in the lead of the 1st Marine Division, which was 20,000 Marines and sailors, 20,000 Marines and sailors on the way up to Baghdad. And Brian's unit was at the point. And when the scout platoon commander of that unit, and that's the unit that is at the very point, was seriously wounded one day, the battalion commander really had to wonder whether or not that unit could stay in the fight. It was the unit's first time in combat, and they were pretty shooken up by the loss of their lieutenant. But Brian McPhillips volunteered to lead that platoon, and Brian's reputation in the unit, as well as his reputation amongst all the Marines, gave the battalion commander confidence that Brian was the right individual for that job. And of course, as Representative Keating said, that's where, on the 3rd of April, Brian lost his life. You know, to me, it isn't so much about the circumstances surrounding Brian's loss. What I think you'd be surprised about, even those who know the story but maybe didn't know Brian McPhillips, was the profound impact that Brian McPhillips, a young man who's just getting started in his own life, the profound impact that Brian had on others. And I thought that what I would do this morning is just share with you stories from 2 Marines that served under Brian in Iraq. And I think the words of those 2 Marines, better than any words that I could come up with, actually describe the impact that Brian had, but more importantly, the impact that Brian will have for many, many, many years to come. I just want to share with you this, and I think the McPhillips family has heard these stories before, but I'm just going to read. These are the words of 2 young sergeants that served with Brian. First one is a Sergeant Eric Jimenez from his platoon. He said, "I had the great honor of serving and fighting right behind Lieutenant McPhillips for most of the war. One memory I'll never forget is of April 2nd, the first time we saw combat. It was a terrifying moment, and I still see him standing tall, calm, collected on the radio, with no fear, leading his troops. Seeing him gave me strength, knowing what a great leader the Lord had given us. He's a true hero that I'll never forget. My twins were born on March 15th, 2003, and he was the one that gave me the message on a small green paper pad, and I still have that today in his memory." The 2nd Marine is Sergeant Jason Morgan. It's been 5 years, and he wrote this in 2008. "But I still remember sitting with Lieutenant McPhillips playing dominoes in Kuwait, getting ready for the push. I remember talking with him about God and how it was so important to have him involved in our relationships. Well, I finally took his advice, and I'll be getting married in August, and this is August of 2008, and we've made God the center of our relationship. And now, in words that this Marine wrote to Lieutenant McPhillips, he said, 'Sir, I know your life is perfect where you are. I just wanted to tell you thanks for opening my eyes to how to make life a bit better here on earth.'" Another individual that Brian McPhillips influenced, of course, as the representative mentioned, is Matthew Bean. And Matthew didn't know Brian, but another son of Pembroke. But in part, according to his pastor, he was inspired to enlist in the United States Army as a result of Brian's example of service. And in his case, on a patrol to look for 3 soldiers who had been kidnapped south of Baghdad. Matthew Bean was on that patrol to go save those 3 individuals, one of whom, by coincidence, was another son of Massachusetts. That's when Matthew lost his life. But much like Brian McPhillips, Matthew, as a young man, had already demonstrated extraordinary character and a deepness that you don't typically find in young people. And he had an impact on other people that went far beyond his years. And I just want to share a story about him, much like the other 2 stories about Brian, that I think give you some sense of Matthew Bean as the person. Matt Bean landscaped the grounds, and this is from Heather Connor. Is she here, by any chance? Some of you may know Heather. She's from here in Pembroke. Matt Bean landscaped the grounds where I worked for 2 years. His pure, bright spirit that greeted me each week with a warm smile and an offer to help with whatever needed to be done. I remember the day I asked him to please not join the Army. I said, "It's too dangerous, Matt." He just smiled, and with a twinkle in his eye, he said, "Don't worry," wanting to reassure me. In his world, all that mattered was that he followed his heart and God's plan for him. A few months later, he planted a flower for me in memory of my father, who had just passed. We spoke about death, and both agreed we were not afraid to die. The gift, I said, that comes with death is that you get to feel how much you really love someone. That relationship continues on forever, and that person becomes your very own guardian angel. Matthew Bean smiled at me that day and nodded his head as if he knew exactly what I meant. What I hope this morning is not that the plaque that we're about to unveil reminds people of how Brian McPhillips and Matthew Bean died. Not that it just reminds them of the sacrifice that they made and the extraordinary sacrifice of their families. What I hope is that when people look at that plaque, they'll actually remember how Brian McPhillips and Matthew Bean lived. They'll remember the values that they demonstrated, the very best of values of our nation and the values of Pembroke, Massachusetts, and the family values of the McPhillips family and the Bean family. That's what I hope folks remember. And I hope when the selectmen meet here and they see those plaques, they'll remember their responsibility to create the conditions here in Pembroke where families like that can continue to thrive. And I hope that when people from Washington, D.C., like Representative Keating or myself, come into this room and they look at those plaques, they'll remember our most profound responsibility, which is to make sure that the sacrifice of young men like Matthew and Brian actually matter. Our most profound responsibility is to make sure that their sacrifice actually has meaning. So, ladies and gentlemen, I can't tell you today what an honor it is for me to be here in, again, what David McPhillips described as a family event. And I want to recognize him as well for someone who, with profound grief in his own life, has chosen to give back to others and to serve others in a way that I know Brian is looking down with pride at what his dad is doing today. And if you listen to the anecdotes of that short life that Brian McPhillips lived here on earth, I don't think you have to look any further than Mr. and Mrs. McPhillips to know where that centering came from, where that faith came from, where that commitment came from, and more importantly, what you see in the stories of Brian McPhillips and Matthew Bean are 2 individuals who weren't caught up in themselves. Everything they did before they joined the Marine Corps and before they joined the Army, everything they did reflected a concern for people, other people. And again, when you talk about what gives me confidence and optimism about the future, people can talk all they want about today's generation and today's generation being absorbed in themselves. I will tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that's not what I see. It's not what I see. There's plenty of Brian McPhillips and Matthew Beans out there. There's thousands of them out there. And they're doing all kinds of things. And so the final thing that I hope will happen when this plaque is unveiled is that when young people come into the town hall and they look at that, they'll be inspired too to serve. Not necessarily just in uniform, but in some way to recognize that what life is all about, and what Pembroke's all about, and what the values of Brian McPhillips and Matthew Bean are all about, are serving others and doing things for the community to make the community better. And I can assure you that their example will be one I will not forget. And the commitment to remember them is also something that Pembroke is all about. And for the McPhillips family, I think you know, I will not let Brian McPhillips' memory be forgotten. And I'll leave here today. The Bean family wasn't able to join us, but I'll also now forevermore associate Matthew Bean's name with Brian McPhillips' name. And when I remember Brian, I'll quickly remember Matthew as well, and Jesse, all sons of Pembroke. So, ladies and gentlemen, for my wife and I got to tell you, we woke up this morning a bit disappointed to go back to Washington, D.C., but as I mentioned it sincerely, I am energized to go back and exercise my responsibilities. And on my worst day, when I feel like complaining and whining, I'm going to remember, although I won't be able to see it, it'll be etched in my mind. I'm going to remember this plaque and realize that there's people out there that are counting on us to do the right thing. People that are counting on us to make the sacrifice and example of Brian McPhillips and Matthew Bean matter. And that's what I'll be all about when I head south here this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. David McPhillips, Veterans Officer for our town of Pembroke. Got a great bit of credit today, but I want to point out that there's a Veterans Office in Massachusetts in every town. Rooms like this all through our state. Massachusetts does a great job helping the veterans. Today we have Secretary Urena. He came out from Boston. Thank you very much. And Mike Peraza, fellow Veterans Officer from Stoughton. Roseanne Whitback, Plymouth. She's organizing a 50th anniversary for Vietnam veterans. And Mike Thorpe is here, and Bill Dodge from Marshfield, who is organizing the U.S. Army Field Band, and that's on Veterans Day. So I'm extremely grateful for the town and state and how they fund us. I have Mrs. Whitman. She helps me in my office. She does more work than I do. And all being said, color guard, retire the colors.
That.
Stand put.
Roll it up. Right. Hey. Roll it.
Present arms. Order arms. At ease.
And I will say, town of Pembroke, you are dismissed.